This week's blog post is the History of Outdoor Sculpture in New York City, Part 7, Allegorical and Mythological Figures. Allegorical figures represent abstract concepts such as justice, liberty, fortune, time, and melancholy. Typically, they're identified by their pose and attributes. For example, a blindfolded woman with a scale and a sword stands for justice. Such figures have a long history in art, but in 19th century New York City they were rare. The only one seems to have been Justice atop City Hall, which was placed there when the building housed courts as well as bureaucratic offices. That's this one. The version that's currently on top of City Hall dates to 1887. The next allegorical figure, which was very prominently placed, was Angel of the Waters, which surmounts Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. Dedicated in 1873, it was meant to be a reminder of the healthful waters brought to New York City by the Croton Aqueduct. It was created by Emma Stebbins, who lived and worked in Italy. Even more prominently placed was the Statue of Liberty, designed by Frederick Auguste Bartholdi and gifted to the American people by the people of France. It was dedicated in 1886. In the period from the 1850s to the early 1880s, we've seen a multitude of subjects: military memorials, heroes of immigrants, politicians, founding fathers, businessmen, and figures in the arts. In the early 1890s, the typical subjects shifted dramatically, and the reason goes back to developments in France. As the best architecture school in the world, France's Académie des Beaux-Arts attracted students from the rest of Europe and America. From the 1830s until the 1890s, the favored style at the Beaux-Arts was an eclectic combination of Roman, Renaissance, and Baroque. Columns, round arches, pediments, and domes proliferated. To go with the architecture, architects commissioned timeless figures with classical drapery, usually of allegorical subjects. The first American to attend the Académie des Beaux-Arts was Richard Morris Hunt in the 1840s. By the 1870s, Hunt was one of America's most prominent architects. He was a leading figure in the design of the buildings for the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. 20 million people came to admire the White City. For the next 20 years, until the end of World War I, the City Beautiful movement took hold in America. Its historical styles nudged aside the work of more idiosyncratic architects such as Louis Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright. The City Beautiful movement led to some stunning outdoor sculpture in New York City. In this post, I'm looking at a dozen or so of the very best ones. This one is a memorial to Richard Morris Hunt, America's first and most famous Beaux-Arts trained architect. It includes allegorical representations of painting on one end and sculpture on the other. This, which also dates to 1901, is the Soldiers and Sailors Arch in Brooklyn's Grand Army Plaza. At the top of the arch, a woman drives a quadriga, a four-horse chariot. She represents either victory or Columbia, the United States. This is one of many Civil War memorials. In 1903, Daniel Chester French finished Alma Mater, which is education personified. Also 1903, Augustus St. Gaudens completed General William Tecumseh Sherman. Sherman's horse is led by an allegorical figure of victory. This is from 1907. It's The Continents by Daniel Chester French. The Continents are 4 over-life-size figures in front of the Customs House at Bowling Green. Daniel Chester French did a hell of a job on the symbolism. This is the main monument from 1913. It has a complex allegorical program, which I've described in a blog post. There's a link to that in this week's blog post. On the top is a gilded figure of Columbia Triumphant driving a chariot with seahorses. The group in front represents courage, peace, and fortitude, and on the other side of the base is a group representing war, justice, and history. On either side, here, are sculptures representing the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, the theaters of the Spanish-American War. This is the Firemen's Memorial by Attilio Piccirilli, 1913. Piccirilli is the one who created the main monument, which we just saw. This is a moving tribute to New York's fallen firemen. On one side, a woman in timeless classical dress grieves over the body of a fallen fireman. On the other end, she prepares to tell her son that his father has died. The only modern elements in these two groups are the thigh-high boots worn by the firemen on one end. You can just barely see them. And the fireman's helmet and the fire hydrant on the other end. This is, of course, Grand Central Terminal. The sculpture is called The Glory of Commerce, and it was dedicated in 1914. At the center, Mercury's or Hermes represents travel, commerce, business, and wealth. He is flanked by Hercules and Athena, who represent physical and intellectual endeavors. This is one of my personal favorites among outdoor sculptures in New York. It's a monument to Isidore and Ida Strauss, who were lost on the Titanic, and it represents memory. These two used to be at the west end of the Manhattan Bridge. They are by Daniel Chester French, and they were dedicated in 1916. They represent Brooklyn on the left and Manhattan on the right. They are now in front of the Brooklyn Museum. And the last one we'll look at today is the Washington Arch, 1916 and 1918. The arch itself was dedicated in 1895. It finally got its sculptures of Washington in 1916 and 1918. Washington as Commander-in-Chief is flanked by Fame and Valor. That's by Herman McNeil. And Washington as Civilian is flanked by Wisdom and Justice. That one is by Alexander Sterling Calder. The blog post has a list with links of all of the other allegorical sculptures that were done through 1918. That's it for this blog post. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the free Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.